That would be greatly appreciated. Just a bit of trivia. This Great Decisions program, it started in Cyprus in 2011. At the end of this year, or the beginning of next year, it will have hit its 100th presentation. Right? That's pretty neat, right? And these presentations were done primarily, almost exclusively by residents. Some of them, such as Dave, has done multiple presentations. And interestingly enough, when we moved in here in 2018, the very first event we came to after we moved in was Dave's Great Decisions presentation. So that was really neat. Before we get started with this presentation, I just want to let you know that we have, after this, we have a May and June presentations. In May, Larry Potter is going to give us a very interesting take on China, which differs from a lot of what you hear and read about. And in June, Clint Laird is going to do something that we haven't dealt with before, and that's the political situation and potential problems with it in South America, which was not an issue until we got some materials that told me we better think of it as a real issue. So today, though, this is our topic, the search for energy security, primarily focused by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And Dave will be presenting it, as I mentioned. Dave has had a really interesting and productive life. He's started out in his work career as a senior teaching fellow in electrical engineering in India, has a master's degree. He and his family moved to London in 1965 to get medical treatment for her daughter. In 1967, they moved to Montreal, where he was employed as a systems engineer by Nortel Networks, where he held positions in technology and marketing. In 1976, he came to Raleigh as director of marketing, and in 1985, vice president of strategic planning. Now, everything he's done is really interesting, but when you look at these resumes, they're like a Rorschach. Ink blots mean different things to different people. I was particularly impressed by the fact that for 2 years, he served as a Canadian delegate to the United Nations in telecommunications and addressed a special session of the General Assembly of the United Nations in Geneva in 1980. After wowing the world, in 1985, he created Rendall Associates, a telecom consulting group. In 2003, he was appointed Entrepreneur in Residence. What a lovely title, Entrepreneur in Residence at NC State Business School. And in 2008, as an elder in the Hope Church, now elder has nothing to do with age, right? Just as an elder in the Hope Church, Dave started a business incubator program for budding entrepreneurs. And that in itself would be an interesting topic for him to talk about at a later date. So I give you Dave, and we're looking forward to it.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As they say in Southern, hi you all. This energy is the basis of this universe. It is also the basis of life as we know it on this planet. Energy consumption and production has been a basic necessity of humankind from its source. And its various methods of production and consumption to the electric grid and transportation have been its main drivers. However, this talk is not about energy as a totality, but it discusses the global landscape of energy in its various productive forms that was suddenly altered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The fallout from that has triggered multiple tremors, has created new challenges, and has induced new thinking as we move in a world of fossil fuels. Let me begin by telling this story. It's a story that starts with looking at trends, both in the production and consumption of energy. It talks about these trends, and it doesn't try by itself, and neither do I, predict trends. After all, a great American philosopher, Mark Twain, once said, "I never predict trends, especially about the future." However, I prefer another American philosopher, Yogi Berra, who said, "Never is a trend more obvious than when it is about to change." And that is the subject today, change. Change creates discontinuities. And we as human beings treat discontinuities two ways. To put it in human language, fear and greed. To put it in business civilized terms, it is survival and opportunity. Those are the two ways we respond to discontinuities. We discuss that in these discontinuities. But more importantly, the heart of this presentation is not merely our response to discontinuities, but the unexpected consequences of the reaction, both of fear and opportunity. And I will end this presentation by understanding new emerging challenges that are taking place, plus some new, more positive thinking about the world of energy as we see it. Let me set the stage for this story. Okay, I'll wait. Predicting trends, I said, responding to discontinuities, coping with the laws of unexpected consequences and new challenges that require new change. This, in summary, is the presentation. I was going to stop, but let me start by setting the stage. The stage started at the turn of the 21st century. The 21st century started with 20 years of rising prosperity. It was all fueled by global energy. Many things happened. Many startling events happened. The first, and I'm going to spend a few minutes on the first part, US discovers shale. At the beginning of the turn, the US was producing about 12 million barrels of oil. It was consuming 15 million. We were importing. By the end, because of shale, and we were now producing 18.8 billion barrels of oil a day. What is shale? Let me spend a few minutes. Shale is rock formation, soft rock formation, and the technology that drove shale into prominence, 4 basins, the Marcellus Basin, Haynesville, and the Permian Basin, one in the Appalachians, one in Texas. This drove shale into the prominence. It transformed US energy thinking. Shale was discovered as being profitable because of one single technology. It was called fracking, horizontal fracking. There was a technology before that, just as a personal reminiscence. It was in the 90s. That was also patented. It was called solvent extraction. A company was formed called Solvex. The patent was owned by a gentleman called John Rendall. He was my identical twin. He passed away and now is with the Lord 15 years ago. And he's the one who introduced me to the vagaries of oil. However, carrying on with energy, shale. Shale then had another effect. The other effect of shale was gas. It doubled US gas production. It brought the price of gas down by 30%. It was cleaner than coal. And at the same time, at that time that occurred, this occurred another event, which was the concern about global warming, fossil fuels, the use of coal. The Environmental Protection Agency decided to put a penalty on anything other than refined coal. Refined coal removed 95% of the particulate emissions from coal. But there were 140 plants grandfathered. Immediately, American capital, particularly the utilities, jumped on a new scheme. They were given incentives by the US government. 140 coal plants were closed. 80 gigawatts of power was taken off the electrical grid in that period of time. It reduced coal consumption by 30%. But gas increased by 2.5 times. Gas is now the primary source of energy that is fueling the US grid. And that is how US shale works. Carrying on, OPEC. OPEC, not to be beaten, ramped up oil. Both Russia and today, at that time, the time I'm talking about, the total oil supply reached 95,000 barrels per day of oil was being generated. However, coal surged in Asia, primarily because the 4 principal countries in Asia that were growing, and we shall discuss this later, were doubling up in 10 years their GDP, and their energy needs skyrocketed. They did not have gas, and they didn't have other alternatives. Coal was there, and it ramped up. On a more sobering note, nuclear. We had 2 tragedies and 1 near tragedy in that time. We had Chernobyl, we had Fukushima because of terrible problems in Japan. Japan froze all nuclear production. Germany said, I'm not going to do nuclear. While in the US, another factor occurred. In the US, because of regulation and because of many restrictions, it became tremendously expensive to put in nuclear plants. The 2 current nuclear plants going in Georgia have been behind schedule for several years. They've cost several billions of dollars more, and American capital decided this is not where we are going to invest our money. With the result, nuclear lost steam, not merely because of those tragedies, but insurance costs, delays, maybe regulatory overzealousness, but that is another question. And therefore, nuclear got wiped out of the progressive map at that time. And now we come to mounting concerns. The mounting concerns accelerated during this period of time because of fossil fuels. Remember, at the end of that period, 80% of the world's 116,000 terawatt hours of energy was produced by fossil fuels. 80%. Its sad reflection is still the same, but nevertheless, out of this, the culprits were coal, gas, and oil. That was the situation at that time. To put the stage in a different perspective, how did the US and a few other countries respond to this concern? The concern really was a change. The change that occurred was because of a virus found in a bat in a Wuhan fish market. Spread like wildfire that by February 2020, the world was paralyzed. All transportation, which was stopped, cold. Nobody could travel anywhere, even for work, remote learning thing. What happened at that time was another thing. Once COVID took hold of the US in February 22, the world's economy changed. Our look at energy changed. Oil dropped from $95,000 barrels of oil down to 72, 73. The US dropped its oil, and so did oil and gas. You know, oil cost minus $10 a barrel on the spot market in May of that year. You could, if you wanted to buy oil, they'd pay you for it. So did gas. It went down. Drought hits Europe. The consequences of this, the reaction to this, is fascinating. I'm going to pick 4 areas of the globe to discuss how this affected our thinking on energy. First, the US. This is interesting. The first thing US capitals do when faced with this, they shut down wells. 1/3 of the US wells in the Permian Basin shut down totally. We dropped oil from 18.8 million barrels down to 11.5 million barrels a day. We took all the capital that was being put into it and froze capital spending. All capital spending on fossil fuels was stopped immediately. Just dropped dead. We increased at the same time a lot. Due to the Obama administration, we put $1.5 trillion to feed alternative sources of energy and electric vehicles. This is fascinating. This change, as we say, there was fear. We stopped. What was the upside of it? These subsidies of $1.5 trillion created and propelled to become the richest man in the world, Elon Musk. He took 800 million of that. The rest is given to wind and solar. Wind and solar is fascinating. We gave approximately 800 or 750 billion dollars to them. Do you know who took the major share of this? Have a guess. Which state benefited the most? 75% of all of it was in one single state, the state of Texas. Texas used this, I don't call it funny money, they used the government incentives. They borrowed cheaply at 0 interest rates, and 2 families that I shall not name were part of it. They are political people who are now in charge of our climate philosophy. What happened next was interesting. Once they put it in, the other states were Oklahoma and Kansas. Number 4 was California, incidentally. In case you thought California took the money. But making money out of opportunity reminds me of a story some of you may know. A temperance preacher got up one day And he said to his audience, if I was in charge, I will throw all the beer in the world into the river. I will throw all the whiskey in the world into the river. I will throw every single bit of wine into the river. Amen, he asked them. They all said amen. Then the choir director got up and said, the closing hymn shall be 365. Shall we gather at the river? And so, that is how we responded. And what about the others? The EU. The EU was faced with other problems. Hydropower had declined. There was a drought. They started using more and more gas. Some of them started using gas they asked Russia to produce more gas. They then started looking at Qatar and Algeria to produce gas. They also had some lip service they already were in the wind business. Remember North Sea, remember Norway. They were already in the wind business. So they started some wind and some subsidies. Not very much, not like the US, but they did. Then comes the selected countries I mentioned. VICI, Vietnam, India, China, and Indonesia. At that time, they were growing at 6 to 7% GDP growth, almost triple of any other country. They had decided that to heck with this. Global warming, we have no choice, survival. They had coal, and they moved to build it. They didn't have gas. As gas prices went down, a new phenomenon emerged in natural gas. It was called liquefied natural gas. America started building plants, and so did Qatar and Algeria. And would you believe it, Russia? They then started a process to move to build more gas plants. Guess who was funding it for some of those countries? China. Then we come to other countries, some of the other countries. They also were moving to gas plants, this time really subsidized by China. And then they were looking for repair. Never, as we say in the colloquium, never let a crisis go without seizing an opportunity. They are now looking for $100 billion per year from the US and EU to help them because we were the culprits. To put this all in another perspective, the total population is 7.9 billion. We are 335, approximately 4%. Do you know how much of the world's energy we consume? Close to 19 to 20%. So, coming close is EU. The countries that are growing the fastest are 2.8 billion people. The rest who are trying for survival are 3 billion. Some of them don't have enough electricity or of gas or of heating fuel. That is the picture as we see it. Now, what did this produce? By January 22, COVID-19 restrictions eased. We then started coming out of this. The new stability, the new regime started. Prices started to stabilize, energy prices in particular. Oil was now at about 60, 65. Gas was about 2.5. Consumption, everybody was predicting, but I didn't predict to rise substantially. Climatologists, on the other hand, kept defending their predictions with the decline in consumption. They kept saying, watch it. Coal is still a major source. The pollution in the atmosphere. Now the change went from global warming to climate change. Extreme weather is going to affect the poor people. It's not endangering the planet Earth as we know it, but it is endangering about 2 billion of the population, really much. And that's where we stood. And however, then came another blow. And this is where we start. On February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded the Ukraine. Three-pronged attack, 50,000 troops, 1,000 tanks, aerial bombardment. They were supposed, from Belarus, the troops went, they were going to surround Kyiv within 3 days. They came in from Crimea and conquered those states they thought were more powerful. They even bombed near Chernobyl and had to close that power plant, that nuclear plant, down. They thought it would be over, and the world thought it would be over in 3 days. 3 days went to 3 weeks. The world looked on. The first thing we realized that Ukraine started cyber hacking. All the communications in that three-pounded ground to a halt. The missiles were going awry, the tanks were turning on each other, and they ground almost to a halt. In this, a new scheme arose. A new figure on the horizon, the Zelenskys. The Zelenskys, a school teacher and former comedian turned prime minister, electrified the world. A new Churchill came on board. I shall fight them in the trenches, I shall fight them in the air, I shall fight them in the air. We will not surrender. That was their motto. They mesmerized the world. They galvanized public patriotism in Ukraine. Ukrainian fighters came alive. Russians, most of them on pension, scrambled for cover. Now the US and EU said, this is worth fighting for. 14 months later, they're still. But this story is not about the fascinating events in Ukraine. The focus of this story is energy. And so let me return to the energy front. Gas. All of a sudden, the first revolution, gas became green. The World Panel said, gas is, after all, much better than coal or oil. So let's put gas in. Gas became green. Russian imports from Russia gradually halted. They only gradually halted till almost they are non-existent now, except for some gas, right? What EU did was take oil and gas, you know from where? They signed a long-term contract with the Saudi Arabians. Then what I call the FIG countries in Europe. FIG stands for France and Russia and Germany. France and Italy and Germany. They started importing natural gas, LNG, from the US. The cooking gas in France today comes from US LNG. And also from Algeria. And then they diverted a lot of other gas from these supplies. What did that do? It almost threw 2 billion people into darkness. Because most of the third world bought these oil in what I call the spot market. They couldn't afford it any longer. It was terrible till the IMF and World Bank came to their rescue. And then they started living again. Global energy prices now skyrocketed. They became so volatile. Do you know in the middle of the year what the price of a barrel of oil was? $120 a barrel. The price of natural gas moved at one time to $16 per 1 million BTU from approximately 2.8. Meanwhile, what did Germany do? They said, to heck with global warming. Germany has a lot of coal. She had been up to this time surreptitiously sending coal from Rhine to Austrian power plants, who then gave them back the electricity. So they could virtuously say, we have cut our supplies of gas. They started saying no. They have now built 4 coal plants. On top of that, they said no nuclear. They have 4 nuclear plants they were going to abandon. They said, no, we're going to keep it. As far as oil is concerned, do you know something strange? They have a very big shale oil deposit in their forests, untouched up to now. There is rumors they're going to go after shale. Right? That's the initiatives of Germany. Now, having said that, the real issue is something compounded this response, because the heart of this presentation is a response, is the after effects of this response. Let me add one more view to it. While this was going on, US capitalism and enlightened self-interest to keep oil prices high froze oil production. They would not increase it. With the result, Americans were now using 14 million barrels a day, and we were only having produced 11.7. We had to import oil. Guess who was our first importer from Russia? But that stopped, and so we are now importing oil from Saudi Arabia. And to make bad situations worse, OPEC has decided the same way. No more oil. As a matter of fact, we're going to reduce it. Oil consumption is now, oil production is now going down below 75 barrels, 75,000 barrels a day. Now, the world is crumbling. Unexpected consequences are emerging. What are these unexpected consequences? I'd like to give you these in a tale of 4 countries. The first country I'd like to deal with is India. India adapted. Like all nations have to adapt to reality. They moved basically to Russian oil. They bought it between $58 and $60 a barrel. They moved to Russian coal. Russian coal is imported by them. Unfortunately, they got squeezed out of Russian LNG gas, because guess who bought the contract? Japan. Now, they signed a new contract for Australian oil. They've increased one of the dirtiest coals in the world called lignite. It's soft coal. Coal is not equal everywhere, by the way. There's hard coal, mineral coal, and that's another story all by itself. And they all halted gas production because it was too volatile. The next country, the US, full of contradictions. The first thing we did was we tried to pressure the Saudis to increase oil production. They refused point blank. In plain English language, they said, go fly a kite. They started chastising US producers. Bring those oil wells, existing oil wells. Yes, about half of shale production is on federal land, and the permits had been stopped. Pipeline permits had been stopped. And so the energy producers just turned a blind eye to it, in spite of the chastisement they got. Meanwhile, we draw down from our energy reserves. It's down 20%. The energy oil reserves that we have. And then we increased the subsidies for green. The current budget, another $1.1 trillion. That's a story of who's using this $1.1 trillion. Guess who? 3 new plants in Phoenix, although Intel is putting up 1 plant, and that's for another reason. LG from Korea, Samsung from Korea. Many foreign companies are putting in capital to seize the subsidies that we are giving, both for electrical vehicles and for wind and for solar, in spite of the tariffs. However, Russia, on the other hand, Dixon. They have decided, after all, when oil was selling at $25 a barrel, they were in trouble. Now they're selling it for less. They're now getting $60. They're selling less, yes, but they're selling it for more value. Their response to EU price caps is surprising. Did you know that all Kazakh oil, which is on lease to Chevron and Exxon, to drill the oil from Kazakh oil fields, have to flow through a Russian port. The Russians had seized that oil, and any oil passing through that port, they are now making $8 billion a year on tariffs of Kazakh oil sent to Europe. The ones who are swallowing that 8 billion, guess who? Exxon and Chevron. Now, Putin, of course, has a new slogan, MRGA. How many of you know what that means? Make Russia great again. This is not a story about Russia, but I have ideas of how this war will end, with Russia currently chairman of the UN Security Council. But this is about energy. Then comes the winner, China. China has won this energy game hands down. They are the Saudi Arabia of every single form of renewable energy, starting with electric vehicles. They are the prime supplier of, per electric battery requires 220 pounds of graphite. China is the biggest supplier of graphite. China is also the biggest supplier of lithium. China also has cobalt and other minerals used in the supply of making ultra-thin solar blades. Wind power, for wind turbines, they make the best wind turbine blades known, and they sell it at dirt cheap prices, swamping US steel, for example, by over 60%. They also have, every time I think about solar energy, I think about what happened in Texas. When wind and solar power was there, remember extreme climate, there was a big blackout. The first thing that happened is it destroyed all the solar panels and the wind turbines. It put Texas in blackout. 111 lives were lost at that time. However, to remedy the fact, what you need to do is to build up batteries. And these stationary batteries are lead-acid batteries. And who produces the best lead-acid batteries in the world? China. Who produces the best solar panels? Silicon ingots with the rare minerals required have the cheapest solar panels in the world today. They have it all. Their near-term energy requirements escalated. They need more energy to do all this for supplying Europe and most of the US with these renewables. Elon Musk made hay because he signed a contract very early in China. And do you know how China is meeting the needs? They've got coal plants, 140 new ones. They have installed 4 APR Westinghouse nuclear reactors. They're the third largest supplier of nuclear energy. On top of which, they needed more coal. Guess who is supplying them the coal? Peabody Energy of the United States plus 2 others. They have signed a long-term contract for US coal. And do you know how it's being transported? Through Oregon ports. Why Oregon? The Longshoremen's Union of Oregon got a sweetheart deal for their pension funds, funded by guess who? The unions of Peabody Coal. With that sweetheart agreement, we have no problems in shipping. They went right through. And that's why Peabody Coal, if you are an investor and you invested in Peabody Coal, it went up 60% in stock market value in that period. They also moved to hybrids to ease a load on the electric grid. There's too much use. They had their company BYD and Elon Musk were using all the subsidies and going high. So what they did starting last year was reduce these subsidies dramatically. BYD and Elon Musk suffered. The stock suffered, if you remember. They then said, the company BYD, you know who a minority player in BYD was? An American investor. His name is Warren Buffett. Late in December, guess what? Warren Buffett sold all his minority interests in BYD. And it is rumored he is now buying a significant stake in the other automotive, Li Automotive, which is now making hybrids by the thousands in China. Li Automotive has taken away from there. That is the move. You know, it's interesting. I don't know how many of you read the Wall Street Journal. Today's Wall Street Journal has a very interesting article on lithium. It said lithium prices, which had gone up, have suddenly dropped 20%. And they said, you know, that's good news. Well, the real news is there was an oversupply of lithium because the Chinese stopped supplying electric vehicle needs at that time. That surplus is what reduced the price by 30%, incidentally. Now, they've also moved to increase the underdeveloped countries are searching for energy. There are a lot of shale deposits. One of the biggest is in Africa. All the nature reserves have shale behind them. And who is now contemplating putting shale there? China. They also are now having got this energy might, they are now swinging their power on the global stage. Having said that, what's Russia's invasion really cause? The first fantastic thing is gas became green. All of a sudden, it's not a fossil fuel any longer, it's clean. Coal continues to be king. In spite of all the efforts, there is no way that coal is used for survival, by the way, not because people are making lots of money on it. These two combined cause new challenges to be created. These new challenges are formidable all by itself. These challenges require radically new thinking regarding CO2. Before I close, not close, you know, I've come to realize one thing. I'm no longer a spring chicken. And let me start by talking about these new challenges. EVs, wind, EVs in particular, they are forming an enormous burden on the electric grid. Yes, we are moving from oil, but we are moving into coal and gas, because that's what forms the electric grid. Furthermore, wind and solar. You know how they are overburdening the electric grid? You know, you hear talks, 7% of the US is going to 10% wind and solar. Listen, that is rated energy. Do you know how efficient wind is? Only 31% of wind energy is effective. And that too is erratic. You don't know when the winds come up and when the winds go down. Solar is even worse, 21% effective. The rest of the time it's ineffective. So when you hear about 10%, be of good cheer, it ain't 10%. It's somewhere like 2.5%, 3%. And so that has adding enormous uncertainty to the grid. And what does the grid do? It has backup batteries. But backup batteries do not fill the total need. It has to have more and more. And the talk goes on. Wind and solar have another problem. And that challenge is that of recent origin. Wind and solar was funded by subsidies and still is. The cost is much higher if you remove the subsidies, and the utilities are paying the price. But that's not the full story. Most of the funding for wind and solar came from one single bank, Silicon Valley Bank. It broke. It's now having to pay interest rates from 0 up to 10% for any borrowing it does. 3 recent projects are threatened to close. 2 offshore wind projects and 1 onshore solar. This year it is predicted, recently, that if they are not rescued by the US government with another $500 billion, we will reduce the amount of solar energy increased in the US. That's how pathetic it is. That's a challenge. The other challenge is nuclear. That had the greatest promise, but it has 2 challenges. The first challenge is very simple. Do you know how many nuclear power plants are there in the United States? 92. I know I'm a little over time, but you took more time than I thought you would. Basically, nuclear's challenges, there were 92 plants. They provide almost 20% of the power capacity in the United States. Guess what? Do you know how old they are? The average age of a US nuclear plant today is 40 years. When we started, the average life of a nuclear power plant was 40 years. What they did and scrambled was got the Environmental Protection Agency and other regulatory bodies to persuade us to move from 40 years to 60 years. It's given us some grace period of another 20 years. But be of good cheer, there is no supply coming behind it. The Westinghouse, the only manufacturer, was bought by Toshiba. They may be able to put in a couple of these 1.2 gigawatt power plants called APR 1000 in service after this. The 2 power plants are now being completed. It is anticipated if this trend continues, we will have to replace more than 60% of our nuclear capacity, which is over 12% of our energy needs, most probably by gas. There's no other way. And then on top of it, we have the other promise, the promise of, I think it's fishing. Bottling, as they call it, bottling the sun in a bottle. Yes, scientific inference show great promise. Technology is reluctant. Welding technology hasn't improved. The environmental agency is stumbling. Our manufacturing expertise has diminished. Do you know the biggest challenge our manufacturing industry has? Qualified labor talent. Most of the labor want to be in service or in information services or go flying all over the countryside. The younger generation are not interested in serving in the nuclear industry. Investment industry is not interested in nuclear at the moment. Maybe that will change in the future, but right now, nuclear is not a solution. Then we have local versus global pollution. Actually, the studies state that the world today has 400 milligrams of CO2 on an average per million cubic foot. Well, that's a good average. It's like saying, what is the average life or average something or the other? But local pollution is far more dangerous. And that's what has to be looked at. There are 10 cities in the US that are the most polluted. Guess which is top on the list? Birmingham, Alabama. It has ancient plants grandfathered. Those factories are still working, spewing forth carbon dioxide like you wouldn't believe. The next is Houston, followed by Chicago, then the rural areas of Pennsylvania where the old steel mills were, and I can go on. We need to mitigate climate change with technology. Just imagine, some of the worst storms in US history ever went through California. 11 people died. Why? Because we took technology. Weather forecasting was good. People stayed in the place. We now have better homes. We build better homes. When Ian hit the coast of Florida, only 11 people died compared to a century ago in 100, more than 300 people died. So we are mitigating climate change with technology. And recent data shows it. There's a calming going on. Nobody is now talking about how much. Yeah, they're talking about 8.5 and 1.5 degrees and all sorts of things. Meanwhile, I'll conclude this. Sorry taking this long, but with the punchline. What is the solution? Let me start. I'm going to ask you a question. In which year was the hydrocarbon molecule first used for energy production? Any guess? Well, let me tell you. It was at the birth of humankind. The human body is the biggest engine known to man. Use the hydrocarbon. You breathe in oxygen. You breathe out carbon dioxide. It's an engine that never stops, even when it goes to the repair shop. Fantastic. It has its defects, obviously. As you grow older, carbon dioxide comes out more than from the nostrils. It's called flatulence. It increases carbon dioxide. Guess what the solution was? Gas X. Not euthanasia. And that is the solution, ladies and gentlemen. New thinking. We need gas X. We need clean coal. We moved from refined coal to clean coal. We can drop coal emissions by more than 30%. Clean gas is already there. We need to get clean gas go down even more. Clean oil. Oil today is 50 tons of CO2 to produce gasoline, 50 tons of oil per barrel. Chevron says in 5 years they can reduce it to 25 tons. It could go down even to 12 tons. At the end of, if we spent their money correctly with the gas X type solutions, we can reduce CO2 emissions by more than 75%. On top of it, we can accelerate energy efficiency. Right? Look at our 4 elevators in C and A. They're all having chronic bronchitis. And they're on life support. Their energy consumption is 4 times normal. If we only changed it, we could reduce energy consumption here. In Cyprus. In Cyprus, we could do a lot of things. Energy efficiency. Remove all the ancient refrigerators, air conditioners, put in heat pumps, and be modern. That will save another 30% of energy. And then let's start using hybrids for a change. Let's start saying we can reduce oil consumption by hybrids. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll come to you with the microphone.
I want to know if Biden has allotted a lot of money to send us all gas X tablets.
By the way, there's a new, if you read the papers, CO2 is being captured today, and it is being put and passed through seawater. Guess what is the end product? Sodium bicarbonate. There are techniques to reduce CO2 today that is unbelievable. If we only spent the money. Anyway, next question. Yes.
You mentioned heavy hydrogen fusion. Once that is controlled, and many of our national laboratories are making progress on controlling it, all of these problems disappear.
You're absolutely right. Science is great. They don't have the technology, we don't have the manufacturing, and we don't have the capital. Apart from those simple things, you're absolutely right.
They first have to know how to control. uncontrolled. All of our hydro, all of our
Elmo,
energy is
I understand the scientific theories behind this,
hydrogen.
but let's be practical. We need money to build plants. We need talent. Most of our people are studying the liberal arts. I mean, have a break. We don't train people enough. Anyway, next question.
Yes, sir. You didn't say much about how to equitably share the world's burden on reducing global
Yes.
climate change.
We give them free of charge, upgrading all their nuclear plants. We give them free of charge, mitigating technology. Remember in India what they do? Interwork the waterways. Flooding is reduced. Provide more money and more incentives for better buildings. All we have to do is the simple things. Don't throw money at people. Teach them how to fish. That's our principle. Enlightened self-interest, as Ayn Rand once put it, is what governs American idealism.
But sharing the burden between China, India, and the U.S., who's providing the money to that? Who's pushing
India
China
and China don't need money. They need the technology. Give it to them. The countries that need the money are Congo. The countries that need the money are Vanuatu. The countries, some of them like Brazil, whose fishing villages are 18 feet underwater. Build the dikes, like in Norway. Do practical things. Rather than moan about the problem, solve it. And the solution is GasX type solutions. Believe you me, that's far more effective, and people love it. I'm living longer because of GasX. Hey, give me a break. Right. Thank you very much.
You ready for next year?
I don't know.
I knew it'd be interesting. Thank you, Dave. It's always interesting. Thank you very much. Always interesting. And you win the prize for giving the most of these, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.